And we're live.
And we are live. Welcome back, listening audience. We are glad to welcome back Ashley Hlebinsky to the listening audience. Hello, Ashley. How are you?
Hey, Jake. I'm doing really good. Very different from yesterday.
Yes. Yeah, I wasn't able to make that. I was getting my hair did, which is
It looks
nice.
beautiful. Looks beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a very good barber I've known for 19 years now, and my kids are going to him, which is super cool too. And I'm always glad to give him some business. But we are back, and you are back, and it's been a minute since we last spoke with you. And for those of you who are not familiar on this show, Ashley's relationship with the organization is a unique one. She serves on our board, but she also does some really cool things in the community, and you've worn a lot of hats over the years. I'm definitely going to have you like recapture some of that stuff. But I think what makes you super unique is that it was this show where you basically announced to the public, or as I like to say, came out of the closet, as having battled with bipolar disorder type 2 in your case, and being a firearms person. And I think that's really, really cool because as we start to punch more and more holes in these myths that people have in their heads, the chorus of voices behind people like you is encouraging even more folks to step forward, acknowledge that they're struggling so that they don't have to struggle quite as much, and without sacrificing their rights. So I mean, I hold you in a very high esteem, not just for that kind of courage, but also for the work that you do. And I'm going to turn it over to you to explain some of that work, because that's why you're back today, is to discuss and share some of what you've undergone in the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. So I guess the first time I was on the podcast, I was talking about my diagnoses with bipolar 2 disorder and then PTSD, which I don't talk about as much as the bipolar 2, because there are a lot of people that are good advocates for treatment with that. But I do also suffer from that. And the kind of motivation for me to start talking about it was the fact that I was doing so much stuff in the public eye for firearms history. And I just kind of started getting fed up of being terrified of somebody finding out that I was suffering from these mental health disorders. And I talked about this on the first podcast, but, I just kind of started getting irritated that people would comment on my Instagram and be like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for all that you do for firearms history and the community. If only crazy people wouldn't get guns and everything would be fine. And, the realization that I had was like, well, I mean, I'm a crazy
Am
person.
I a crazy person?
I'm going to appropriate that term. Like I'm a crazy person,
Yeah.
and you're thanking me for my work. And that, that is kind of like the go-to mantra of both sides in terms of this gun debate. And I certainly understand, where people are coming from with that, but it almost seems like people with that suffer from mental illness tend to get, blamed or thrown into the crosshairs on both sides. And that's really not super helpful. And one of the things I, always talked about with that is the fact that, the gun owning community are, the bulk of that statistic. More than 2/3 of all firearms deaths are, death by suicide. And if the gun owning community is literally killing itself, they need people to feel comfortable to talk about what they're going through. And so I don't know if I'm the best advocate for it, but I try. And my background, for just those who don't know, I'm a firearms historian. I ran the Cody Firearms Museum, which is the only accredited firearms museum in the United States. And I redid it while I was at Cody. We redid it with a lens of not just encouraging visitation from gun enthusiasts, but also people unfamiliar with guns. And since then, I've built and rebuilt museums. I'm actually in LA right now because I'm doing a renovation in the Los Angeles Police Museum today for an event they've got on Sunday. And I've been kind of doing a lot of expert witness testimony, which is what we're going to get to, I think. I am the founding executive director of a firearms research center at the University of Wyoming, which is housed in the College of Law. There's a law professor who started it with me. And so he's kind of the legal side of things. And then I'm more of the material culture and history side of things. And then just, playing a historian on TV and all kinds of crazy stuff. But it's been a ride, because I learned during COVID, when museums didn't really have a lot of money, I kind of branched out into different firearms history worlds that I hadn't been in when I was just in the museum community. And so it's been kind of really interesting, and I've learned a lot about what works, what doesn't work, what I like, what I really don't like. And so now I'm kind of restructuring the work that I do to better educate the public and to better maintain my own mental health, we'll say.
I want to spend a little time on the TV thing because I don't know that many people know about that. So share a little bit about that, and then I have another follow up that's sort of related. But what do you mean when you say TV?
So early on, when I went to Cody, I started my career at the Smithsonian Institution's National Firearms Collection, and then I went back and forth between there and Cody, Wyoming, while I was finishing up college and grad school. And I don't know if you guys can tell or know this, but I'm not an old white guy. So pretty quickly after I went to Cody, Cody was very obviously it's one of the top search terms when producers or whatever were looking for on camera experts. And then, they quickly found, I was 25, when I took over Cody. I was blonde, I was kind of the opposite of what you expected. And so I quickly got put on camera, which I thank my youth drama nerd for being able to do that. But it really actually put me in a position that's far more public than I had anticipated. My job, like I just wanted to be like locked in a vault and like managing collections. But because I was a little bit different, I got kind of thrust into the limelight a little bit more than I had wanted, although I do really enjoy it now. And so I started doing a lot of on-camera stuff for Travel Channel, Nat Geo, Discovery. I had a very short run as the co-host of a weapons making show on Discovery Channel, which I feel like there's a lot of people that really liked that show, but it makes me cringe to watch myself back. And now I've been on Outdoor Channel's Gun Stories with Joe Mantegna as an on-camera expert for 9 seasons. And I have been a writer and producer for shows on history, on Discovery, on Outdoor Channel. So I love the thing I love about my job the most is public education. I'm always in my entire career been I've never publicly taken a position on firearms law at all, because I want to be able to talk to everybody without judgment. And I want people to feel comfortable to come and ask me questions. Cause I know a lot of times, we eat our own in the gun world, but then at the same time, a lot of people outside of the gun world are afraid to ask questions because they're afraid that people are going to jump down their throat. So the TV world allows me that opportunity. So I keep sticking my face on things despite the fact that it stresses me out.
That's awesome, though. It sounds very exciting. It sounds like a neat dynamic that you never wanted to step into, never thought it would be possible. And the follow up that I had is you alluded to something about like finding out the work that you like versus the work that you really like versus the work that you never want to do again. Or I may be putting words in your mouth, but 2 questions, because I think a lot of us go through this in our careers, our lives. We have seasons of life where things are really enjoyable and then they don't be enjoyable anymore, right? So what is some of the stuff that you really enjoy versus stuff that you're letting go of? And then how did you arrive at that point, like with the humility to say, and the strength, I guess, to say, I don't want to do this anymore, even though I'm good at it, which I'm reading between the lines here. I'm guessing that's the case because you're pretty much good at everything you do. So
it depends on what side you ask. And what judge
you know your own strengths, right?
Yeah. So I do love television. I'm often simplifying it, but I being bipolar too, it's very easy for me to kind of take off and get excited into things, and then my brain gets rambly and racy, which I don't like to minimize the kind of problems that come with bipolar 2, but I also attribute a lot of that to success that I've had. Although I will say that when the pendulum swings back, it's not fun. But TV to me was a wonderful outlet where like this is gonna sound so bad. I don't have to work that hard because the general public doesn't know all the different nuance and layers, and we don't have time in a 22-minute show or a 42-minute show. So like literally when I was hosting the show on Discovery, it would be like, I would come out and say something super simple, right? Like, during the Revolutionary War, the standard infantry gun was a flintlock musket. And like everyone was like, oh my God, you're brilliant. And I didn't have to do any prep for that. And I would be out there for 15 minutes and then they would do a set change. And then I would sit for like 4 hours and then they'd usher me back out to say something, just like that again. And it's a little bit of a, it's good for the ego boost until you see Twitter after it releases. But I do enjoy that. I love museum work. I think museum work is really important because there are firearms related artifacts in pretty much every museum in the United States, and there's very few people who are specialized in it. And especially in the kind of political climate that we've got with guns, a lot of people struggle with interpretation, how to interpret firearms, knowing the kind of baggage your audience may bring in. And a lot of people are choosing to not display firearms as a result. So being able to kind of be that intermediary for different museums, kind of talk to them about their collections, what's appropriate for their mission. And I really do, I like encouraging people to do research. Like I love doing research myself, but I really am trying to foster kind of a new generation of firearms scholars, which is where my involvement in the research center comes in. Because when I wanted to study firearms history in graduate school, I kind of had to make my own pathway. There's not really a firearms, and history certificate or degree that you can get in the US, unlike the UK and the rest of the world, where it's actually a lot easier to study arms history. And so, kind of encouraging the next generation to start studying firearms, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of history that gets chunked up into talking points for both sides, that simplifies things down. And for me, I always said this at Cody, and I still believe it to this day. It's not my job to tell you what to think about guns. It's my job to give you enough information that you can make an informed decision, whatever that may be. And so that's kind of the things that I've gotten passionate about over the years. And the things that I did. Let's see, how do I phrase this? I used to be able to do certain things that would allow me to educate the public, and we're hinting around the expert witness testimony that was helpful to both sides. And then things got a little volatile after the 2022 Supreme Court decision. People call it the Bruen decision, and it kind of shifted where that type of testimony really pitted me against other scholars, and people trying to imply my belief systems, force belief systems onto me on both sides. And I realized, if my goal is to educate the public without judgment and be able to talk to everyone, this is no longer the outlet to do that.
So I really struggle with that, because I see that in the marketplace of ideas across many interfaces. It's not just firearms, which is loaded with people who try to twist information, cherry pick data, massage stats and facts, or just provide revisionist history to suit their narrative on both sides, right? And I see it in medicine, I see it in mental health, I see it in public policy. Obviously, it's in politics. But how do we sift through the seemingly legitimate presentation or presenters who have all the credentialism behind their names, and realize that what they're spinning is agendized? Like, how does one do that? I mean, I love what you're saying about like helping people do their own research, right? Which has become like this, like, I don't know, condescending throwaway phrase since the pandemic, because we just got barraged with not good information. And then somebody would be like, I did my own research. And then we got condescended for it. It's like, oh yeah, you did your own research. Like, you got a master's in public health, right? It's like, well, no, but I can read, and I have, some experience in reading statistics, right? And like, I'm not dumb, but it was almost as if we take somebody, run them through this filter of what the recipient now deems as worthy credentialism, and if you don't meet the recipient's, I don't know, barometer or benchmark, then everything gets thrown away that person could ever say, right? So you mentioned it yourself. You're like, I don't have the certificate in firearms history or whatever that they have in UK. It's like, it'd be really easy for me, if I were a skeptic of what you were saying, to be like, discredit Ashley. She's not what I think she should be.
Yeah.
So how do we go through that? How do we wade through this and figure out what's real and actual versus what's been manipulated, massaged, or otherwise altered?
Well, I think, I mentioned, I don't have a certificate in firearms history, that doesn't exist. But, one of the biggest criticisms of me in the kind of court world is that I don't have a PhD. And that's been used as one of the greatest invalidators of my
Totally.
expertise. Also, My husband apparently means that my husband being in the gun industry apparently means that I'm incapable of independent thought from him.
Yeah.
But I think this is a larger conversation that I'm hoping balances itself out. And I can only speak to really my field in history, which is I wrote an article for an arms journal, but then also it's on the firearmsresearchcenter.org's forum, and I call it History on Trial. And it's about the effects of the historical community in a post-Bruen era. And I mean, one of the limitations in the academic community is that lack of kind of understanding about the fundamental, technology behind firearms, and whether or not knowing different information or having different information would change your conclusions, and they may not, and that's totally fine. And I guess that's an important thing to point out too, is that because it always drives me crazy when people are like, what are the facts, how do we dissect reality from not
which
reality?
facts?
Yeah. And that was always one of the things that I'm always really hesitant for, because in the history field it's all about disagreeing. And so, like, you could give me 10 facts, like actual facts, right? Like, this is when the wheel lock was invented, or this is when rifling was invented. So, like, that's something that, like, yeah, we can argue the exact date and the exact location, whatever, but we know that rifling was developed around 1450, but you could give me that set of facts, and this is what you see in the testimonies, and then you give that same set of facts to a different person, and we can make vastly different conclusions. One of the unfortunate things that I'm seeing post Bruen is that it used to be, here's facts, and I don't agree with your conclusions, or I agree with your conclusions. And now it's, if I don't agree with your facts, there's actually been several panels about this in the academic community since, and it's, if I don't agree with your facts, then you're abusing history for political gain. And that really breaks my heart, because that really affects civil discourse in the community. It shouldn't all be like-minded kind of beliefs. And so what I've seen in this world, because and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself and should probably explain a little bit more of what's going on, but what's happening is moving history so deeply into the court system is kind of forcing the discourse to pick a side, even if you yourself as a scholar aren't necessarily choosing a side by being hired by a side. That side is being default projected on you. And then all of the baggage that comes with, the side you're on, it kind of manipulates, what you may or may not have to say about the topic. Yeah. Does that make sense? And yep. It's a shame. And I'm hoping that, this real big kind of push for the importance of history in the court system maybe calms itself down, at least in the historical field, so that we can go back to doing our jobs, which is doing research and making conclusions. And that those conclusions can support whatever, side, but not pitting us against each other as much as it's gone on. And I mean, that's what a court system does, right? Like, it is the job of a lawyer to make me seem like a horrible human being. It's a job of a lawyer to make me sound like a bad person, an inexperienced person. I get that. But it's a different level of nastiness than I experienced pre the Supreme Court decision.
So do you feel like what side do you get it worse from? Because at one point you said the gun side eats its own, which I completely agree with you. I'm your biggest supporter in that comment. But I guess when you're in there, because I'm trying to think of the scenarios of where you're spitting facts, which hey, if the fact of the matter is this was done at this date and that's true, then where does it get sideways, I guess? And then who's the bigger culprit of coming after you?
So it's been different over the years. I used to not really get a lot of flack from either side. But I have been called, I always joke, I've been called everything from a shill for the gun industry to a Bolshevik. I always used to joke that I felt like that meant I was doing something right. But what I learned, at least in the past couple of years, in being kind of in the crosshairs of this gun debate that I never meant to get myself in the middle of, that having those haters on both sides made it so that I really felt very lonely and didn't really have a place to land. But I will say that, one of the disappointing things that has happened, because, obviously when I've been hired in a lot of these cases, I've been hired for, the plaintiff against state cases. And because the lawyer's job is to invalidate me on the other side, I feel like I've gotten a lot more negativity from people who support various gun laws, which is, unfortunate, because, I'm willing to talk I'm willing to provide information, and I'm really just trying to provide information. And it just, because they have to make me a monster, it's really gotten pretty ugly. And then my dumbass, one of the things you're required to do as as an expert is attach your CV. And I attached my CV as as it normally exists, which has my phone number on it. And so, yeah. And so one of the cases I worked on, the law firm actually that I was, employed by, they, post everything very publicly online. And then all of a sudden I'm getting these calls, and people are just like nasty threatening me. And I'm not going to lie, sometimes I couldn't quite tell which side they were coming from. But these nasty calls, and they would call me like 10, 11, 12 times, and they would leave these voicemails. And I was just like, what is going on? Like, how are they getting my number? And then I Googled myself, just out of curiosity, and it was one of the top things that came up. And they have since redacted that, and the calls have kind of calmed down. But it's the first time I've gotten like threatening phone calls in my life. And so in this respect, I would say it's probably more people who support gun laws than it's been the pro gun side of things over the past few years. But I've gotten it from both sides, and I kind of wish that I wish that people could see that. I know they can't see beyond what they have to prove in a court case in order to justify their own point. But I kind of hit a point with the expert testimony where I said, I can't be the monster that the gun control movement needs me to be. I'm not the monster the gun control movement needs me to be. And I'm not the, super rah, person that the gun community wants me to be. I'm just here, and I am passionate about gun history. And so I felt like I couldn't make anybody happy. And if that's the case, then this wasn't the right avenue for me to educate. Like, I want to be able to talk to, as many people that will listen, because there's a lot of people caught kind of in the middle that have questions that are being pushed one way or the other, because because one side, demonizes the other. And that's unfortunate, because there's lots of people who could be swayed, and they're afraid based on what the, media individuals kind of push about the types of people that are on both sides.
I don't think a lot of people watch court cases, right? That are interested.
God, I hope not.
Right. So even though it's kind of like when you testify in front of the legislature, you're talking to a very, very limited set of people who probably are only going to listen for the duration of your testimony and not dig any deeper anyway. And in my experience, maybe 8% of what gets shared actually gets digested. So it's like, yeah, I think you're right to think that that's not the most efficient use of your time if you're going to try to broadcast it to a large audience. So aside from writing a book, which could be static and held out there for a really long time, like what is the best way to reach people? I mean, I'm on X trying to reach people, with mental health stuff, and trying to correct some of the misinformation out there. And I get blasted for that too, because there's people who are absolutely ideologically married to their belief systems, and they will not entertain anything to the contrary. So I feel you, not to the degree that I've gotten threatening phone calls yet. I'm sure that day will come. But what do you think the best idea is here? Like, how do we reach a bunch of people with neutral, unbiased history? How do we do that?
So one of the reasons I'm so passionate about kind of the academic system, because even though it tends to be more politicized, and obviously, anytime the research center is a part of the College of Law, and so you're going to be looking at more Second Amendment scholarship. But part of the reason that I'm there is because I want to make it more cross disciplinary, so it goes beyond kind of that big political debate and scholarship. But having more specialized research facilities within universities, I think, is really helpful, to hopefully broaden the narrative. Right now, because we're pitted so strongly against one another in the courtroom, it's kind of making that a little bit more difficult. But I think being that person that you can call, I'm that person to a lot of journalists behind the scenes, that they can call and they're going to get an answer from me, that is unemotional as it can be, and that they can ask questions. Becoming that resource, becoming not the boogeyman, you know is really, really important. And I've gotten that through TV, I've gotten that through Research Center, I've gotten that through Cody. So continuing to do any type of kind of public education, forward facing role, I think, is really important. I was thinking about, actually, on the way to California yesterday, and I was like, one of the biggest things that they criticized me for in the court system was that I haven't been published in an academic press like 30 times, like some of the professors who were testifying that have been doing this for 30 years, 20 years, 40 years. But the reality is that in my 15 years of experience, I was building a museum that is in and of itself a peer review, because I had external and internal reviewers for all the content. And I said, I'm not undervaluing their scholarship by any stretch of the imagination for going through a peer review system, although I do have issues with a peer reviewed system when there are limited peers within that community. How do you have successful peer review if you don't have peers, or you have limited peers?
Exactly. Yeah.
There's definitely some push for that. But then I was like, how many people read those articles? But how many people come through Cody? 200,000 every year. And so that to me is a really great way to kind of communicate that effectively. Because what I've seen in the court system, at least, that's frustrating is, one side will win, quote unquote, right? Like everyone will celebrate, whatever side wins that day, but then it's appealed the next day. And then, so then, like, no matter what side you're on, you think it's appealed, and then it goes back and forth. And it just feels like this kind of cyclical thing that will never quite get solved. Or when it does get solved, you go all the way up to the Supreme Court. I mean, even look at Bruen. I mean, the challenges and all of that that's gone on, they're fighting that battle, internally, but that's not really helping the public understand. In the meantime, there are people that got to go do that. That's important. But, I'm realizing that, we're not helping people while that's all kind of happening. Right. And one of the biggest things that kind of frustrated me in that world is that we're demonizing one another so bad that we're pushing people into bad places mentally, when the goal is to save lives, right? Both sides, whether you believe the genuineness of either side, whatever. But like, if the goal is to save lives, why are we demonizing people to the point of, considering, having suicidal ideation because they feel like they've got no place to land? If more than 2/3 of firearms deaths in this country are suicide, and people are, completely not able to see the human and one another, like, are we really doing what we think we're doing? Are we really doing good? And there's so much push for all these other types of crimes, which needs to be addressed as well. But I felt like the toll I saw just in me, personally, it was crazy to me to be like, I don't think either community realizes that they're necessarily pushing people to want to potentially hurt themselves in their fight to prove a platform. And if I'm being very, blunt about it, and Jake, I mean, how many times I call you crying, over the past couple of years when things were getting bad, and people were calling me and threatening me, is that, like, the thing that kind of made me realize that this this wasn't productive dialogue anymore and what pulled me out of kind of my mental spiral. And as a person that grew up, I've got imposter syndrome, so I don't need I don't need a judge to tell me all the things they don't like about me, or I don't need a lawyer to do that. I already can make all the lists on the planet. I'm like, you want me to ask questions for myself? I'm happy to do it. I can cross-examine myself probably better than you. But the thing that pulled me out of it was I made the realization that no one's going to stop pushing me until I'm not here anymore. And then if they were successful, no one would really care. But I'm sure both sides would be more than happy to use my statistic to push their own kind of perspective. And the fact that that was just a really dark but big moment for me, because I was like, if I become a statistic because I'm starting to spiral, because I'm just tired of getting hit from every angle, and being afraid because people are calling me, and being afraid to do anything for fear that I'm going to be labeled something that I'm not. The realization that it got that bad, and that if I had done something, that wouldn't have mattered. That wouldn't have mattered to anybody. I just would have become a part of the statistical fight that everybody's having. And I don't know, that sounds really dark, but that's what pulled me out of it. Is that weird?
It's not weird, and I'll tell you why it's not weird. I use that exercise with people quite frequently who are locked into rigidity, binary thinking. They're taking themselves too seriously, or their job too seriously. They're burning out. And I say, look, if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, what happens? And it's like, what do you mean? It's like, no, really honestly endeavor this thought experiment. Like, you get hit by a bus, you get buried, what happens? Like, people are sad. Yeah. And then life moves on and your work moves on. You're a cog in a machine. And it's like, I don't say that just to drive anxiety or make people think that, they need to slip into nihilism because nothing matters. It's to have a healthy balance and realize you don't need to stress yourself out, because you're no good to anybody if you're incapable, you're, losing weight, like you're not sleeping, like whatever it is. Right. So we need to make sure that we're approaching what we do in life with a really healthy balance and an open hand, and not take it so seriously, because you're right. The machine won't care. And I think that if I get super cynical about this, it's hard for me to pull out. But to your point earlier, it's like, yeah, both sides, we'll say both sides want to save lives. I think there are individuals within the camps that want to save lives, but I think the machines themselves, the orgs, the blobs, they'll just use that as a talking point to get what they want. But the machine doesn't care. The machine wants control. And it's both sides have the machine. The machine is, we want ultra freedom, or we want ultra restriction, or whatever it may be. And behind that, we operate, but behind the statement of we're just saving lives, right? It's like, yeah, are you though? Because if you were honestly trying to endeavor this, you would let facts fall out. You would let historical significance fall out. You would honor the other people's perspectives and treat things with an open mind. And that's not happening. Clearly, it's not happening if you, caught in the middle, are experiencing this burnout, we'll call it, because they're not honest when they're coming forward with hey, we just want to save lives. So, all right, well, let's figure out the best way to save lives. And some of the best way to save lives is root cause mitigation in communities. But I've said this before, it's a very hard sell politically when you're like, hey, just
a lot of work
for 2 generations, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of work. But so, Ashley, I have quit Walk the Talk America. Jake has quit Walk the Talk America numerous times. And when I say quit, it's like we get in these moments where we're like, I got to step away. I can't do this anymore. Blah, 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 blah.
I'm just going to go drive a forklift at Home Depot.
Right. for me, I wish people could hear the private conversations I have with both sides. Right. I really do, because I think they would even see the other side in a different light. Like, I get calls from all kinds of people that people would be like, why are you even talking to them? And I'm like, because the person I'm talking to on the phone is totally different than the public persona that you're seeing, and they're asking me questions. Absolutely. And we're having good discussions, and whether it goes anywhere, it doesn't matter. Right. But where do you get, in your situation, where do you get your wins, I guess, that can help you stay positive? You know what I mean? Are you getting phone calls from people being like, hey, I know you're taking a lot of shit right now, but what you did was awesome up there?
Yeah, I do get that, for sure. People with a lot of support structure. or there is like individualized support. But one of the things that I think has been a little disappointing is, I'm not looking for like, like pat on the back, like give me an award for, sticking my neck out there and to do my job. But I think that there's one of the not wins is that people still somehow see what I do as frivolous a lot of the time and not important. I have emails, important people in the industry saying that, not realizing the significance of, what we're doing. But there are individuals out there. I mean, obviously, like, I don't know if anyone goes on my Instagram, like I have like, I don't have a huge following, but like my following is the best. Like they're small but mighty. They're so supportive. I've always said on my Instagram, like, do like if you name call, if you're going to be nasty to people, because I've got people on all sides, firearms interest on my page, so we don't have like people aren't like dropping like weird nasty comments, on my page. And so that support, is really really nice. I just wished on a larger scale it was seen as important. And this is actually one of the things that has happened and changed after Bruen. So when I worked on, so I do expert witness testimony for a lot of different things. I started off doing cold type single action product liability for old model Ruger revolvers, and I worked on a murder case up in Canada, which was wild. I worked for the Crown. I was an expert for the Crown. It was actually a rapper in Halifax. Like it was a whole thing.
That's
It was a
crazy.
fascinating.
I'd never heard this before, but go on.
Oh, yes, it was fun. I was like, "Why do you guys need me?" Like, all they wanted was a history of the ammunition that was used in the murder. And he was a rapper in Halifax that rapped about gun violence and peace before he, shot and killed somebody. And then when he was like waiting trial, he wrote a rap about how he did it. It was a whole thing. And like there was like a fight that broke out in the courtroom. I unfortunately didn't get to see any of that, but I digress. I had done like one or two Second Amendment cases pre-Bruen, and the one thing that I noticed, I worked on the Miller case, which is the California assault weapons case. And, Judge Benitez brought all of us to San Diego to do the evidentiary hearing in the middle of COVID. And the one thing that really struck me was, how many experts that were on the plaintiff side, and how kind of prepared we were to answer questions, whatever, in the hearing, but how unprepared the state was. And it was kind of disappointing to me because I'm like, this is taxpayer money, and they were almost intentionally unprepared, and that was disappointing. But then also I had like the best deposition after that hearing. The state attorney was wonderful. We had a really interesting dialogue for 6 hours. I remember as soon as we went off record, the court reporter lady was like, "Oh my God, that was so interesting." And she was like, "Wait, I don't think I'm supposed to say that." And the attorney that had deposed me was like, "Actually, no, I really appreciate this. Like, thank you for not yelling at me." He was like, "I appreciate the fact that you just answered my questions and that you really didn't have like, a dog in the fight." He's like, "I really appreciate that so much. So thank you." And I was like, "Oh, look at me. I'm doing good things." But what happened after Bruen was that I saw people get their shit together more so on the other side than they had in the past, because they realized how important history was. Because if you're not familiar, the Bruen test is basically that the like number one determinant of a constitutionality of a gun law is based on finding historical analog, most importantly to the founding era around the ratification of the Second Amendment. And then there's in declining scale of importance other area like the second founding area, which is around the ratification of the 14th Amendment, and so on. And so the realization how important history was, or is, sorry, to this kind of legal decision making process caused, I was the one historical technology person, and then I would have 7 PhDs on the other side who would all be responding to me, and I would have like 2 weeks to respond to all these other PhDs. And I just think people didn't realize that, like, like I said, historians have been weaponized against each other. But that the fact that that's happening, that it's not just like the ooh, the gun world win. I mean, it ended up becoming quite a fight going back and forth in a field that I don't really personally feel like it's our job to make those conclusions. It's not our job to pass judgment on what's going back and forth. There are other people that are specialized in that. And so I don't think people realized how much the other side got their stuff together after that. And that's where I saw the difference. It was all like had great dialogues with both sides whenever I was a witness beforehand. And then that ceased to exist after Bruen. And that's where it became a lot more about personality than it became about my research. I'll never forget. So this is really random, funny aside is that so I have a nose ring now because I'm edgy. And, and I remember I got my nose ring and my mom was like, Ashley, how do you expect people to take you seriously with this nose ring? And I was like, Mom, at this point, my resume stands for itself. The first time I was feeling myself because I am a person that has extreme imposter syndrome a lot. I was like, look at what I did in Cody. Look at all the work that I've done, in the public, community. Look at all this work I've done in the academic community. I'm like, how could anybody say I don't know what I'm talking about? And literally the next day, this judge wrote this summary and then just reamed me that I couldn't possibly know what I was talking about, that you absolutely needed to discount everything I ever said because I didn't have a PhD. All of this stuff. And it was like, oh, and so I called my mom and was like, you were right. The nose ring really really hurt my chances. But what was fascinating about that was that the PhD that they were saying to listen to over me, because he had a much longer career and he had the PhD, spent his whole report, justifying single shots versus repeaters and under 10 round repeaters in the post-Civil War period. And he repeatedly said that a Sharps rifle was a 7-shot repeater and a Spencer was a 4-shot repeater. And if you're not aware, a Sharps rifle is a single shot, and then the Spencer is the 7-shot. So the only thing that I could possibly guess that happened there in his brain was that at some point Christian Sharps, separate from when he was involved in the Sharps rifle being made this random 4-barrel pepper box pistol that was completely separate from the rifle. And so it's I just imagine that at some point he swapped the two and then was referencing the 4-barrel for some reason because and I actually didn't call him out for it, but it was really interesting to me that I was completely discounted for my expertise because I didn't have a PhD, and because I work, have won awards, by the Professional Outdoor Media Association, that kind of thing. But I at least knew that a Sharps rifle was a single shot. And that to me was kind of funny. It doesn't mean that I'm infallible. I'm certainly not infallible, but it was fascinating to me that that was the way that the judge was reading it, was PhD. Let's completely ignore the fact that he didn't even know one of the most basic things that he was using to draw his conclusions. I don't think his conclusions would have changed had he gotten it right, but that's still fundamentally important to know. And he was raised up and I was trashed. Trashed is a really polite word for what he wrote about me. And that was that moment where I was like, people don't realize what's now going on in the historical field. And it's very concerning and it's sad for me. And that's why I think that I'm hoping maybe the historical field balances itself out in a couple of years and pulls away from some of that. I also watched a lot of people, who hadn't been experts before. You start being able to read into their testimonies and they're like, oh, okay, now I can tell this is verbiage that you hear the lawyers saying. And so influence and things that I kind of had gone through, 7 years ago, in speaking your voice, no matter what the side of the, that you're hired for wants you to say, that's not relevant. It's what you are saying. And so I watched kind of them go through that journey and I hope they're balancing out. I really don't pay attention to it much anymore, but I hope it balances out because I think in the long run, if we took, technical information that I've got and we took, their kind of processes and way that they think about things and pushed them together, we could probably come up with still very divergent scholarship, but a little bit better scholarship.
Why do you think this has happened and why Bruen?
Well, because Bruen, Bruin's not the first time that a court case has utilized history. Heller very much did as well. But Bruen point blank said this is history. So Bruen didn't even entertain other timeframes. Bruen entertained the founding era, and that was the way that they based their decision. So now you've got people scrambling to find a historical analog, which is basically it doesn't have to be a twin of a past law. So if you've got your 10 round magazine cases, right? Like, so you don't have to find a law in the 1790s that says can't have more than 10 rounds. You don't have to find that. You don't even have to necessarily find something in exact wording of it. But now you've got people that are kind of grasping on both sides to kind of
Oh,
be able to justify to the judge whether or not this counts as an analog. So, like, one example I give that's really kind of interesting is with this 10 round magazine case. So the pro gun side often cites militia requirements. So a lot of militias required you to carry a minimum rounds of ammunition. So it wasn't a maximum, it was a minimum. So you had to have, and
I've
it was
seen
always
that.
over 10. Yeah, so you see that, like, oh, you had to carry X amount of powder, you had to carry this many musket balls, that kind of thing. So they'll point to that, and this is massively oversimplifying, but this is just to kind of give you the way that the brains are working on both sides. So they're using the minimum in militia laws to say that this is why a 10 round magazine ban is unconstitutional. Then the other side points to these fire prevention laws that regulated the amount of powder you could have in your personal possession. Now, it was still a lot of powder. But the amount of powder that you could have in your personal possession, and then above that you had to put it into a public powder house for safety, especially, and there were laws about firing guns within town limits and that kind of thing to try to prevent massive fires from breaking out. So they're using the maximum amount of powder that you can have as a analog for regulating a maximum capacity round in a magazine. And then they go into the world of, well, so here it gets deeper into how long a magazine fed repeaters been around. So magazine fed repeaters have been around since the 1600s. And so have magazine repeaters been around? Yes, they've been around since the 1600s. Nobody's denying that on either side. It then goes into, were there enough in the colonies that people would have known that they were in existence? Because if you're on the side supporting a magazine restriction, then you can say, well, of course you wouldn't pass a law for a magazine fed repeater or repeater over 10 rounds because they weren't that common, or they wouldn't have known about them. So how can you pass a law of something you don't know about? But then you also see on the pro gun side that there are magazine fed repeaters that founding fathers do know about. So how can you argue both sides? They're taking both things, they're not necessarily wrong, but they're having to use that history and massage that history to convince the court system of their side and their positioning. And so that's where I think it starts to kind of get dicey, because I feel like to some extent in some worlds people are grasping at straws to try to kind of justify that. And then the other big thing that you see, so you got founding era around 1791. The second most important time frame is the second founding era, again 14th Amendment. And then you've got the period leading up to the ratification of the Second Amendment. You've got the post enactment period to show you what was implemented immediately after the Second Amendment was ratified. So how were the founding fathers or the different states responding to what the Bill of Rights said, and then you've got the period after the Civil War, kind of leading into the 20th century. And ironically, the 20th century is the least important time. But the only way that you can convince a judge to allow for other considerations like the 14th Amendment is you have to justify that there was a significant change in technology, a significant change in cultural kind of dynamics, a distinct change in levels of violence. And so that's how, so you also see, both sides kind of fighting to either put in or leave out that, trying to prove the point, the series of requirements to allow other timeframes to be, included. And one of the reasons why this is so important for gun law, people who are supporting, restrictive gun laws, is because so many of, our federal laws are 20th century, and they basically have been, really push down the line of importance. When you start seeing your kind of restrictions on different types of firearms, it's really it's not completely a 20th century phenomenon, but it's really a 20th century phenomenon. And now they kind of lost that. And so both sides have to kind of fight for the legitimacy of, entering history, the right history or their perceived right history into the court system at all. Sorry, I was a ramble. I apologize.
No, that's really good. And it really explains a lot. And I appreciate that. And it's really fascinating to hear this play out, because it gives so much more context now to why Bruen everybody thinks it's so important, because now you got two competing sides or ideologies reaching back to contextualize what they think supports their side. Where I was going with the question was, why are historians now fighting amongst themselves? And that's why they're being asked to interpret a standalone fact in somebody's favor in this argument. And so that makes a lot of sense now. It sucks, but I get it.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining that.
Well, and one of the things too that always frustrated whatever side was on the opposite from me is because I haven't really ever publicly made a declaration about how I feel about certain laws, because I really just don't think that's my place. That's not my job. That's not what I was hired to do. And so when they would point blank ask, and actually when I testified in front of Congress, Senator Blumenthal did the same thing. And I didn't know, what the meaning and the purpose was until a friend of mine that worked on the Hill mentioned it afterwards, was to try to get you on the record saying, I support this, I don't support this, because then they can use that to invalidate your, or speak to your bias, right?
Right. You're no longer neutral at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that I would always say, and I believe this, I wasn't hired to make a conclusion on whether or not the law would work. That's not my job. You asked me if I thought magazine fed repeaters existed, and I told you that they did. You asked me that, and I said, but I'm not an expert in sociology. I'm not an expert in statistics. I'm not tracking violence rates, but in states where the restrictions are enacted or not enacted. That's not my job, and I'm not going to, I purposefully don't want to know that information in order for me to do my job, because if I knew that information, or I actively sought out that information, it might make me a more well-rounded individual, as a person. But professionally, that's not my place. And so I've always purposely kept that away. And I know that really that irritated a lot of people, saying I wasn't answering the question, but I really was. I mean, I'm not my, job. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know exactly what the violence rates and crime rates are before and after something. I don't know, and I'm not paid to know. And so I've always kind of maintained that level of discretion, when on the other side there are lots of professors on the other side who they've printed out their whole Twitter pages where they've been very public about how they feel about certain laws. When the other side did that to me, they would provide Twitter posts from the research center that were quotes of other people, not my quotes. And that's the the research center will post opinions all across the board, but they never once had a quote from me. Mine weren't that exciting, I guess, and so I'm proud of myself for continuing to kind of stand that ground. But I know that the longer I did something like that, or the longer I kind of continued on that path, no matter how kind of in the middle I, professionally want, stay, someone's just going to start projecting on me. I mean, they already do. And that minimizes my ability to be effective as a educator moving forward. But yeah, the whole thing has been it has been fascinating. It's been really, really interesting, as somebody that never really had people angry at me, to having a lot of people angry at me was not my favorite thing. I'm not the personality type to thrive in that level of drama. My husband will start to read things out loud to me, and I don't follow a lot of the stuff, again, because that's not my job, and I try to stay as respectfully ignorant of certain things as possible, so I don't let that inform my opinion. My husband will start reading something to me, and I'm like, shut up, I don't want to know. Don't want to know. Don't want to hear it. Not interested, because I don't need the stress of it all. So I'm not really as into the drama and the back and forths as everybody else is. So I was definitely not the right personality type.
Yeah, it sucks, because I have the same thing. I'm insanely defensive, and I mean, Jake and Kevin both know, it's not a good place for me to walk down to the old comment section neighborhood and hang out for a minute, because I stay in, and then I'm like a dog that found a bone, and I'm like, I gotta destroy this person. And it's not even my personality. Like, I always say, it's like we're having Maj on later. Maj has the personality where he can mix it up and get fiery, but have a discussion, walk away, and still buy a beer for somebody. When I remember, and it's funny because I'm thinking about now, like my first divorce, right, or my only divorce that I've ever had. I went
Are you
to
foreshadowing something, Mike?
right. No, but I remember like my attorney saying, "Hey, I need you to show up to court early. I want you to see what kind of mood the judge is in. I want you to watch a few cases with me." And we sat there and we watched cases. And I remember that day I was just like, court is a dirty, mean place, and it's a game. It's a game that we're not invited to the other side of. We don't get to see, because the way that my attorney and the other attorneys and the judges all talk to each other. And then when we went out for a break, they're like, "What are you doing for lunch?" I'm like, "Whoa, you just invited that guy to lunch? Like, you literally, I would have assaulted you with what you said." And I realized, like, they're comfortable, like, really being dicks to each other, and they move on. You know what I mean? And I'm like,
you're a lousy stinking softball player, Jack.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
That's also the
Boys
thing
are going
that,
down, Danny.
that's also the thing too. I mean, yeah, that was kind of one of the things I had to realize, because I take things personally. And I'm not fiery back, I just get really sad. And I can stand my own, but I don't get like back at anybody. It's not in my, personality. But, the lawyers are doing their jobs and they're good at what they do for a reason. But there's that human collateral that I kind of felt like I was a little bit of in the middle of that they don't realize that they're doing their job, but to what end, in terms of mental health of those people. And again, it's not their job to worry about me. I put my own stupid self into the crossfire, and then I kept doing it because I have inabilities to say no for a while. But there is a human collateral piece to it, and that was ultimately what got me so that did make me really sad in terms of like across the gun debate, was this fact that okay, so you're trying to reduce violent crime with firearms, you're trying to reduce mass shootings with firearms, but like everybody has no problem making people want to kill themselves. Like, is that not counter intuitive to the mission? And I got
Actually,
really
they don't see it that
excited.
way. They don't see it that
Yeah.
way. And even if they ever did, if you went to some of those people and said, "Look, your entire process of fighting about this is making me crazy to the point that I want to end my life," they won't take accountability anyway. They'll just be like, "Well, don't be a part of it then," right? Like the cluster B style of narcissism that goes on in that setting is staggering. And they truly, I truly don't think they care. Now, contrary to that, Mike was saying earlier, the individuals behind the organizations absolutely do care. And I'll bet if you told them that, they'd be like, "Well, we should probably rethink this." But it's like, yeah, but against the cause will always win. The individuals just get shuffled out. Sorry, I just want to throw that in there because, yeah, please continue.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know.
Or not.
I'm done.
No, but so is it, like, for me, the most disappointing thing I get is, because I can do it. I can be on a side, right? Like I came from the gun industry. Like I one of the reasons why I wanted to educate people too. But it's when gun people come after me. Like, that is the most disappointing thing on the planet. Because I've armed way more Americans than you have. So I already feel like I should be untouchable, right? Like, no one's going up to Jordan and being like, "You sucked." Like, I'm on your side. Like, I don't believe in red flag laws. I don't believe in common sense gun control per se, like what they call common sense. I think common sense, I can't believe we gave that up. We let them have that, because I think there is some things we could do that are common sense that have nothing to do with restricting anyone's access or rights to firearms. But I get hurt when it's my people attacking me, or Kevin knows that, the other day I was called a communist. I was called a liberal communist, which is hysterical,
Oh yeah, I've been there. I've been there.
I'm like, really? Like, and I made a joke. I was like, well, I am from New Jersey, so I could see why you feel that way. But, it's like, it's disappointing when you walk in there and you're just like, one of the things that resonated with me with what you said is, I'm just here to kind of give you the facts and educate you and then lead you along the way. And I feel like I'm lucky enough to get enough people to kind of like say, oh, I've beaten this one to death, but we talk about the Aspen Health Institute, right? Like when I was up there, just the amount of love I got after speaking from strangers just walking up to me going, I still don't like guns. I hate guns, but you've given me a lot to think about. Like that's a win to me because I'm like, okay, you're thinking like you're seeing something different. And that may spark the idea or the change that may actually create a law or something that makes a little bit more sense than what you're trying to accomplish. Everybody in this fight is trying to preserve life in one way or another. Some people are just a little misguided about how they're going about it, or they think, well, if we do this, then this will work. And I see it where I'm like, no, banning red sports cars is not going to stop drunk driving. Like, stop. You know what I mean? Like, I know that's an easy thing for me to throw out there, but it's not. So we got to like let the Jakes of the world, let all these great organizations, the Kid Safes, from Derek, like LeBlanc, like let these guys work, let them do their work for 10 years. And then you're going to see cultural shifts and things like that. And I know it's not sexy, but it'll work, so I feel you on that. Like, it's disappointing.
Well, and I agree with you. When we created the research center initially, we made our public announcement, and the next day we got wind that a representative from a gun rights organization was trying to push a bill in the open legislative session in Wyoming that would force an oversight committee onto the research center to make sure that we didn't step out of line content wise. And like George, who's is the professor, and I were like, what? No. And I remember him calling me in a panic that it was happening, and I was like, wait, who? Like, who's getting us shut down? Because I was shocked that the reaction, what the initial reaction was from gun rights people, that they didn't want us to exist, or they wanted to have an oversight committee. The verbiage was never that they didn't want us to exist, but we literally kept saying, like, we're an accredited we're an accredited law school. We will lose our accreditation. And morally speaking, George and I we had been working on this for 2 to 3 years, and if that was going to get pushed, we were done. Like, we were going to shut it down. Like, and we said that point blank, we will shut this down if you do this to us. And so I was really, like you said, like, the gun world, turning on you is really hard, especially when, people are trying to paint you or me as this, rabid pro-gun person. And then I'm like, bitch, if I was pro-gun, like as pro-gun and horrible as you think I am, would you, like, why would I be getting crap from gun rights organizations and, getting hit by, different industry companies thinking that we're frivolous and what we do is not important. It's hurtful and almost funny in a dark way, because it's like, man, I wish I could be that thing that you think I am, but people are hitting me on this side too. But you just don't, you cherry pick that piece of that piece of information out, because, like, I had an NRA membership, right? Like, and it was fascinating to me. And I actually ended up getting rid of it because I was like, this is, I'm tired of being framed as a type of person because of a membership I got because I worked with the museum. I paid half price for it because I worked with the National Firearms Museum in Virginia, like when I was at Cody, like, so they cherry pick that out. And it does hurt when, everyone thinks you're just this, like, institution of the industry, and you're like, like, if only you knew, like, stuff that we've gotten on that side too, which I think means we're doing the right thing in the long run. But it is hurtful when you're like, complete misrepresentation of what we're doing.
You guys might be able to explain this a little bit better, but my perception is when we say things like the gun rights people are also attacking us, like, it doesn't make any sense to the common listener, because they're like, "What? But you're pro-gun, right? You're neutral. You're advocating history, like whatever it is, right?" And what you just touched on there, I think is worth explaining. From my perspective, when you say research, historically, and Mike's done a really good job of educating me on this, historically, the firearms, the whole culture has been on its heels forever and ever because they've been told that things like research, like mental health care, like health care at all, is a Trojan horse for gun control. It's the same reason that the CDC wasn't funded to do, research on negative firearms outcomes, gun violence, we'll say, right? Because both parties in Congress, the for and the against, were afraid of the output of that data. They were afraid that those data were going to be used in the opposite direction. So you say the pro-gun people don't want to fund it because if the CDC studies this stuff, it comes out that, oh, yep, there's a direct correlation to firearms access and negative outcomes. And the anti-gun people don't want it because they're afraid that the CDC is going to do this research and find out that there isn't a correlation, right? So both of them had a vested interest in suppressing study at all. But firearms people hear research, no, bad, got to shut that down because obviously they're going to find something out that they're going to leverage against us to take our rights. And I see that so often where the rigid ideologues on the fringes of the distribution curve are more invested in their ego protectionism than they are in doing the right thing. They don't have the ego strength to say, yeah, let's throw everything out and discuss, the mix of it all, because they might be wrong at the end. And that threatens them, it threatens their identity, and it sucks. But I'm curious if you guys see that same thing. I know I'm a newcomer, but that's been my impression.
It's protecting a platform, and the people are just collateral.
Yeah,
is unfortunate. And I was actually kind of, I was excited to see towards the end of last year, all the articles that were coming out on, the Atlantic. That one was tough. The Atlantic article about Bob Owens was tough for me because Bob's suicide is why I got help in the first place. So it was hard. That was hard to read, but it was written by the Trace, but it was a really well written article. I mean, it really was very, I was proud of Jen Jakes for, who worked with Bob for doing the interview. I thought that she helped that whole thing be a lot more balanced than maybe it would have been, but you had that. And then I think the Wall Street Journal ran something, at the end of the year. And I was like, oh, finally, everyone's seeming to want to start talking about suicide prevention, but I don't know, maybe you guys know better than me, but it seems like it's petered off a little bit. Like there was this movement and then we were all like going to talk about it. And now I feel like I'm not hearing about it in the mainstream as much as I was before.
Because for people who don't know Bob Owens and the articles, what's the context there?
So Bob Owens used to run Bearing Arms. He was a big conservative, person in the firearms community. I didn't know him super well, but I guess his his kind of public persona was pretty like aggressive is the wrong word. That's disrespectful, but he was very out there, and very prominent in his beliefs. So he, obviously made a lot of enemies on the other side. I did not know Bob like that. I really only got to spend a little bit of time with him. He was very soft spoken. He didn't come off conservative to me at all. We had a 2-hour lunch right before he took his own life. And what was hard for me in that respect was that I was in a really bad place, and it was the first time I felt like somebody in the gun world understood me. And then he took his own life a few weeks later, which made me get help, because I was like, he's got 20 years on me in this world, and if someone like him can get to that point, then I was worried that I could if I didn't kind of get my stuff together. So it was a very big deal when Bob took his life in the industry. I saw ugliness on both sides. And no one's really talked about it in a long time, but there was a Trace journalist, and it ran in the Atlantic, which was the kind of a big discussion on gun owners being the people that are, the most at risk for taking their lives with a firearm, which, sounds like a no-brainer when you say that out loud. And they used Bob as kind of like the poster child. Again, I think is a little insensitive, and they weren't trying to be insensitive. And yeah, there was definitely, an agenda or a bias in their belief system, but they were really trying to kind of unpack this gun world and this high rate of death by suicide. And so that was the first one that came out. And then I think that was the Wall Street Journal, Zusha, I can't remember his last name, did a whole piece on suicide prevention and the need, and really pushing forward and highlighting the fact that, death by suicide is a big problem in the firearms community. And so I just kind of felt like it was finally getting some airtime by more mainstream media, and I think that's important to get the conversation running across the board. But then I just haven't really seen a ton of it beyond, and it's my understanding, and I don't speak for Jen, but it's my understanding that there was a lot of negativity from the gun community onto Jen for even talking to the trace.
Of course there was.
Yeah.
Because it's just a reaction. Just I like throw up as soon as you see any negative outcome of a firearm, and that's why we lose this battle a lot. Is it's so played. Like, gun people, listen to me right now. If you're listening to this, stop. Literally read an article, like digest it. Don't just see like keywords and to throw up. You know what I mean? Like, it's the same thing over and over again. It's so weird. People just can't, like, there's nuance in every conversation. And to not lean into the negative outcomes of firearms, that's how you do it. Yeah, absolutely. It can't kill a deer. The same thing I shoot a deer with, if I shoot myself with, if it doesn't have the same result, then it's pointless. Because the deer, you know what I mean? They're dangerous. Bullets kill. Like, that's what it does. And suicide, the numbers don't lie. Like, that's the one time we could look at the numbers and say, yeah, the biggest issue gun owners face is themselves, like with their firearm. Like, so what? Let's work on it. Like, let's work at it as a community. And I hate the fact, I know exactly probably how she feels. Just because it's like you put an article out there and you're like, wait, did you read it? Did you digest it? I'm on your side. I'm on your side. I totally agree with you on every aspect of firearms. Like, literally, there's not one, you know what I mean? Like, that's the crazy part about this fight, is when people don't take the time to see what you're doing. And it's easy to kind of be like, well, it's because you're stupid. But I hate doing that to people. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes, but just right. Sometimes you have to move on. Like, Rob Pincus has done a good job of being like, guy's an idiot, move on. Like, I can't help him, right? Like, and sometimes I need to learn that as well. But I feel for her in that situation. But she did it to me one time. I heard that she thought I was anti AR-15. And I remember telling somebody, because they're like, yeah, she thinks you're anti AR-15. And I was like, what? Like, she could have just messaged me. Like, is this how you feel?
Maybe she didn't, But, I think one of the things there is just, I always get really, like, there's such diversity within the gun owning community, and there's a diversity in thought as well. Like, being a gun owner doesn't have to be your identity, and that's okay. You could just own guns, and then those people are going to have different thoughts about gun laws, and those, like, there is this nuance in that community. But the thing that makes me, upset sometimes with gun owners is they're defensive, and understandably so. But, when they throw up their defenses and they fall back onto just, like, the talking points that play into the way the other side is, they're telling the kind of people in the middle, like, this is how they're going to respond, and then when we when they throw their defenses up, and play right into the hand, then it makes people who are, kind of undecided on anything, it makes them not be able to see gun owners as people anymore. And that's, it's that defense mechanism that goes up, or the talking points that everyone's been taught, and that's both sides. But, I think gun owners are at a disadvantage currently for being seen as humans. And, so when they go to those kind of hard stances, or they don't want to talk to anybody, or they just shut everything down, it's sad, because you see that kind of, then you played right into it. And the people that might be, more understanding of kind of what you're going through and what you're dealing with, are like, all right, you said they were going to say this, they said that, so I trust you.
Well, and what that rhetoric does, and we're not good at rhetoric either. We're not nearly as good on the pro-gun, pro-liberty side at rhetoric as the gun control side is. Our rhetoric is reactionary and defensive Theirs is proactive and emotionally driven, right? It's designed to ping your fear and your sadness and your shame and your guilt. Ours is a yes but. And it's not good. Like, we're not even good at it. But what the rhetoric does is it actually, I think, it suppresses gun owners who could be speaking out. All the new demographics in the last 5 to 7 years, especially in the last 4 years, that have entered into the firearms community for the first time. That's the racial minorities, the ethnic minorities, the sexual minorities, the women. They're not speaking up and being like, hey, I'm a human too, right? Because they don't want to be lumped in with the crappy rhetoric. And I get it. I was that guy. I mean, except with my own community. And we could do an entire show on the parallels between this and the mental health world. I mean, if I wrote an article about how licensing boards are stupid and overwrought with Byzantine requirements, I would get slammed by the vast overwhelming majority of my people who think that licensing is not only the best way, but nay, the only way to ascertain competence, right? Same thing in the firearms world. It's like, there's not just one way of doing things, and that one way certainly isn't yours. Like, let's talk about some stuff. But I'm seeing the parallels, and it's crazy to me. And I get why the conversation doesn't move forward when we're self-centering our own folks. And I will say this again, just like the firearms control side, they're not a bunch of awful human beings with horns growing out of their heads. Some of them are probably, but so are some gun owning people, right? Like, the vast overwhelming majority of the distribution curve are reasonable people who just need to come together and talk about reasonable outcomes. And we can't get there if we're so suspicious of whoever the other side is and whatever we're talking about, that they're going to like shame us, laugh at us, talk down to us, condescend us, whatever. It's just, we're just going to keep staring into the chasm. So I really appreciate you coming on. We got to wrap up because we've got another one here in like a half hour, and Kevin's got to make sure.
I mean, if I may just kind of say one, I'm just going to cut you off. No,
please, you're the guest.
That's kind of what when Mike was like, what are we going to talk about today? And I was like, how the gun debate almost killed me. And I intentionally say that to be provocative. But, as we look at it, it's unfortunate that the politics has grown so strong, because I do believe that the gun debate is killing people, because we can't talk to one another. So people are taking their own lives because they feel cornered, or they feel, even if it's not directly the gun debate, but the gun debate, I think, is one of the things that are killing people, because it's causing us to not be able to have greater dialogues on, crime, organized crime, domestic violence, suicide prevention. And so like, how silly is it that, a debate is what's, stopping us from actually trying to, fix things. It's crazy to me. I use that word, crazy. I'm allowed to.
That's right.
You should. We all should. We should bring back a lot of these word policed terms that have been shunned from society, because self-censorship doesn't beget good conversation. So I'm perfectly fine saying crazy, because there are things that are crazy. Like, it's crazy not to have reasonable conversations about positive outcomes and solutions. That's nuts to me. Nuts is another one. Thanks. And that was a great close, by the way. I do believe that it's killing people because we're not able to have,
because we're not having the debate.
Nope. You're right. Yeah. So thanks, Ashley Hlebinsky, for coming on. How do people find you if they want to find you? History and Heels.
So if you want to know more about the Research Center, we are firearmsresearchcenter.org, and we're at Firearms Research on Instagram, and I should know what our Twitter is. I think it's at Firearms Research Center. And if you want to follow me and my like shenanigans, which are a lot less serious than that, I'm at History and Heels on Instagram, and I'm at official Ashley Hlebinsky on Facebook. I have a Twitter, but I don't use it. I just sit on it so somebody doesn't try to steal my identity.
That's why we didn't get the post retweeted when we tagged you.
You did? I don't even know. I haven't clicked on Twitter in probably like 6 months.
It's fair. It's fine. It's a toxic cesspool that just also is killing people, I'm sure. And on behalf of everybody who makes this possible, if you enjoyed this, share it around, invite people back. We're going to be back on at in about 35 minutes, noon Pacific, 3 Eastern, and wherever else you fall in between. We're going to have Maj Toure, and so thanks everybody for your support, and please have the conversation. Don't be afraid. Have some courage, and let's go make Earth better. We wish you all great mental wellness. Bye-bye.